That proves we are.
Hello. You rang? Yes. I'm up in farm, in the crescent room, up in the crescent room.
You know what? My book, if you come up and look at them, please treat them like gold, because I plan to sell them later for gold.
That means you've been eating cheese and crackers.
Yeah, if you've got greasy fingers, just forget it. Anyway, we can begin, but I just want to graph or whatever, and people can buy things. I have to just go run to the hotel room and get my 5 copies of Special Exits, because that's the only number of copies I have left.
Okay, microphone or no microphone? Can you hear me talking then?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we need it.
yeah, there's too much bass on this. I'm a musician. I can't stand when microphones have been, you know, just for like, oh, da, da, da. Not for speaking. Okay, well anyway, welcome to this panel. We're here to talk to Joyce Farmer. And I'm also a friend of Joyce's. I'm going to divide this talk into 3 sections roughly. We're going to do an introduction about Joyce, how she got started, how she started drawing, then get to the meat of the matter, her book, Special Exits, which, by the way, 2 years ago won the Reuben Award from the National Cartoon Society. And
I almost won an Eisner.
Almost, she was nominated for an Eisner and a Harvey.
No. I don't know.
Anyway, it was only the third year they had graphic novels at the National Cartoon Society, and so I think it's quite an honor this year. One of them, Davis Mazzucchelli, won the 2nd year. I'm not sure the 1st year. But anyway, the way I met Joyce was in the late 80s. I started doing cartoons in 1985, and my first stuff was pretty bad, and I had no idea how you got published, who was publishing, but I did find copies of women's comics and Weirdo, and so I just out of the blue thought, well, I'll just send this little strip to Last Gasp and see what happens. And 6 months later, I got this envelope in the mail with this very beautiful handwriting, and it was from Joyce saying, I want to use your artwork in Women's Comics number 10, the politically incorrect issue. And that's how we met. And the rest, they say, is history. And I'd like to say also that we had the privilege of hearing about Joyce's book, Special Exits, from womb to tomb. I remember when she first started talking about doing it, her trials of drawing it, the editing of it. I even met one of the characters in there, the famous slasher cat named Ching, which I think I'm the only person who was ever able to pick up the cat, maybe 1 of 2 or 3 without getting my arm completely gored. And so I would like to start off with asking Joyce how she got started. Joyce, and I don't really think I even know this after all the stuff we've ever talked about. What made you start drawing comics?
You know, I was thinking about that the other day. First of all, Lynn Chevley, who owned the bookstore that was selling underground comics in Laguna Beach, was so incensed at the sexism in Zap Comics and the other underground comics that she was selling, and she was selling them because it was a bookstore and it was an alternative bookstore, so that's why they were there. She was fascinated with the comics, but she was unhappy with the sexism and racism also, I think it's fair to say at that time. And so she had all these ideas to do a feminist comic in retaliation to the Zaps and the ideas that were in the Zaps. And indeed, the Zaps were raping women, murdering women, hacking breasts off, just all sorts of really vicious things, and mainly for fun. So I don't blame her for wanting to retaliate, but when we started, and she was looking for an artist, and somebody told her I could draw, and I actually had to do a drawing for her, that was a dirty drawing. She wanted me to do a dirty drawing to see if I could actually do the type of thing she wanted. So I did the drawing, and That's another long story, and she was very happy with it, and so we started to write our stories. We didn't have a name for the comic series. Well, for the comic book, because we had no idea it would go to 7 issues. When we started writing the stories, both of us found that we could not retaliate in kind to the viciousness that was in Zap Comics. It wasn't in us, it wasn't us, and if we did it, it would be phony from start to finish, and therefore having no inspired base, put it that way. It just wouldn't work. So we started doing our own stories, and I was thinking all along, well, this is really fun. I love the Zaps because they opened up and allowed you to think freely. They allowed you to grow and allowed you to just go anywhere with your mind. And this was unusual even in 1972 when we were starting this. But my mother died when I was 11. She died in 1950. And from then on, my dad sort of guided me, but I didn't have anyone raising me. I never had a mother cracking the whip, especially as a teenager. So I was always kind of able to think my own thoughts and do my own thing, and but there were limits within society, of course. But with starting to read the Zaps, there were no limits. That was just great fun. You could do anything. I started thinking of these various stories, and one of the things, in 1972, there were a lot of Playboys out there. And there was some, maybe Penthouse had started by then. There was no Hustler yet. And the Playboys had these perfect women, and we were not perfect. And we discovered that all women are unhappy with the size of their breasts. There's always something wrong. They're too big, they're too small, they don't match, they say, whatever the problem is. And so we started doing stories based on the philosophy of, if you can put it that way, this philosophy of real women in their relationship to their breasts. And then we got into sexuality and how women think about sex. And then we got into menstrual periods and how women think about them and how men don't. And we just started having fun, and we'd write these stories. We were such amateurs, like the guy at National Lampoon, if anybody was at the National Lampoon one a few minutes ago, he said the undergrounds were so hard to read and so badly written and such poor artwork. Well, that was true of all of our stories, but the thing was we were doing something that hadn't been done before, and we ended up getting everybody mad. We got the feminists mad and the men mad. I was told by a reviewer that a vagina is something to put something into and not for anything to come out of. And when we heard that, when we got that letter, which I still have, I should frame it. When we got that letter, we knew we were on the right track.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to bring up, because up in San Francisco, being a very liberal town, there was women. The first women's comic was It Ain't Me, Babe. And then pretty much, I think Tits and Clits came out a week before women's comics. But there was always like a strong political women's thing up in San Francisco. But down in Southern California, we had no support system.
Nothing.
She was creating all by herself. I was creating all by myself. But it's funny to me because what was in Tits and Clits, you think it was more outrageous than what women's comics were doing. And why do you think that was?
Women's comics was out of a women's collective, and they had a political base, and they were politically correct. And so everything they did had to be done within the parameters of being politically correct. Whereas, in fact, we were in Southern California drinking beer at the beach while we wrote our stories. We were good at hiding that because it's illegal to do. I don't do it anymore, of course. But we didn't have anybody, we didn't even know these people in San Francisco. All we had in front of us were Zap magazines, big ass comics, Dead on Arrival, I remember. And Slow Death. Yeah, a bunch of the old original underground comics. And there were quite a few by 1971 and 72, and I think we started writing Tits and Clits in early 72. This is the first cover. I don't know how much you can see from there, but it's a picture of a woman stealing toilet paper from the men's toilet, because it was our experience that women's restrooms were always out of toilet paper and the men's were not, because women use more toilet paper and the restrooms get maintained at the same time every week or 2 weeks, whenever they do it. And so we thought that was fun. So we do this cover, or I did the cover, actually, in the artwork, and then a reviewer writes the best thing of all, which is it's ironic. There's another word, but it's skipping me right now. Anyway, the point is that it's a symbol for women not having access to the paper to write their stories on. And I thought, you know, we don't, sometimes the reviewers see things in your work that you never thought of, but it's so right on and so perfect that I always appreciated that. Lynn was doing artwork for, Lynn and I worked together.
That's how you met.
How did we met? She owned a bookstore down the street from where I worked, so I was aware of the bookstore.
Laguna Beach?
In Laguna Beach.
Okay.
But a friend of ours put us together. Lynn has a different story, but I remember a friend who was in a nursing home getting over a really terrible accident, and she told us about each other. Or somehow, she found me. I didn't seek her out.
So you had seven issues of Tits and Clits. I helped her co-edit the last issue, and it was incredibly hard at that point. That was the Reagan era. Ron Turner was, I remember him telling us we had to tone everything down, remember? And it was funny because I thought it was very difficult to get people to contribute to the comic, to do really outrageous stuff. Everybody was really playing it safe. Why do you think that happened? I think it was just...
You know, well...
didn't that surprise you?
I don't know if I even thought about it. Of course, after we did this one, we were working on a second Tits and Clits when people started getting arrested for doing this sort of thing. And this became... Lynn had sold her bookstore, but the artist, the writer, the publisher, and the distributor, all in one household and county. Otherwise, they had to go to San Francisco to get Last Gasp and then find the artist in Marin County or something. Anyway, it was a different problem. So we were very, the bookstore that she sold, they arrested the owners because the police were a little behind the times and didn't realize that she'd sold the bookstore. So when they arrested the owners for selling pornography, it kind of broke their chain to come and get us because the investigating officer had bought the last copy of Tits and Clits in the store. So when they came back to arrest for real, there weren't any more Tits and Clits, and they had to arrest on Leather Nun and some other comics. But am I even answering your question?
Yes. I wanted to bring up Fahrenheit 451, which was the name of the bookstore, ironically. And it's very important.
With the permission of Bradbury.
I myself have had my issues with the post office and my mail open, but that's another panel and another convention. I'd like to talk about special exits now.
Well, actually, let's just finish one little bit.
Okay. Yeah,
we did another comic that we changed the name and made it Pandora's Box, and it didn't sell very well because it didn't have a title like Tits and Clits, which anybody would pay 50 cents to have an outrageous comic like that. I mean, it's kind of a good investment, and they are now, I've seen them in mint condition, like this one, except this got a little water damage. I've seen them for $80 odd on eBay, so that's kind of fun. So the second one didn't sell. The third one started being after all the arrests, and this was another big problem. People were afraid to do this kind of comic because they could get arrested. You can get arrested for selling to underage and all sorts of things. We were also problem pregnancy counselors, which was the term they used back then, and we also taught birth control at our local free clinic. And we realized that there was an extreme need to pass on what we were learning to the general public. So we wrote this book depicting 5 different women who were pregnant and didn't especially want to be. In fact, definitely didn't want to be. We wrote it about the different types of women who and how they philosophically approach the problem pregnancy that they are experiencing and what they decide to do about it. So it's out there also, but we found out that this was pretty radical to do, but this was not an adults only book. This can be sold to anyone. It is definitely pro-choice and pro-abortion, and I will stand my ground and still stay that way. I am pro-choice and pro-abortion, and I dislike abortion as much as anyone else does. It's just that I feel it ought to be a choice. And sometimes we are faced with some really awful choices in life, and it should be up to the woman. Sorry?
Here.
Thank
Support you.
Yeah, not everybody feels this way. I can appreciate what Obama and cohorts are trying to sort of slide through on this, but I think it still should be left up to the women. So it should be, you know, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You know, whatever. We,
Yes.
this.
She couldn't resist getting.
I couldn't resist this. I took a riff off of the Holy Virgin. This was a Murillo painting from 15th century or 16th century Spain, and it's pretty much a copy of the painting. But when we tried to sell the comic to, say, Planned Parenthood, they wouldn't take it because of this. It was.
Can you see that's Alfred E. Newman?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now
Alfred E. Newman.
So she got in trouble with William Gaines, of course.
Oh, Gaines wrote us and told us to cease and desist, but of course the thing only had one printing, so there was no way to. Anyway.
Okay, special exits. Why don't you start off by telling everybody the inspiration to start this project, which took 13. She took some breaks during that time.
I definitely took breaks.
What are you doing?
My last comic was 1987, I think, with the cooperation or whatever, collaboration with Mary on the last Tits and Clits 7. Tits and Clits had kind of had its time. There wasn't the audience anymore. Things moved on, like they talked about at the other program. I was earning a living. I got married. I was busy with everything. We built a house. I don't know what all. My parents were very elderly, my stepmother and my father, and they were getting more and more frail, and I was watching them get frail. They lived in South Los Angeles. And I was taking care of my grandmother, who was still alive, and I'd run up to Los Angeles and to her nursing home every week and give her chicken soup and ice cream and different things that she can get from the nursing home. I had some experience in taking care of elderly. I like elderly. They have lots of stories, and I love their stories. So as my parents started to get more and more frail, things would happen that made me feel like I had to spend more time in Los Angeles and start doing with them like I did with my grandmother. And I started doing that, and they had all their experiences of aging, and they eventually died. And after they died, I could not get the funny stories. My dad had a really rapier sense of wit. How do you say it? I'm not sure. Sword-like wit. And he would make fun of the most horrible things. Horrible in that most people would just run in the other direction. He had to make fun of it because he was stuck in the middle taking care of my probably Alzheimer's-ridden stepmother, who was very out of it, but very sweet. And sweet until she got crossed, and then she had a change of personality. But really, the situation was difficult. My dad was 82. He was barely able to walk. He was hobbling along, taking care of everything, and not doing a very good job. I started going up there more and more, and all these funny things would happen. It's just the cat was involved. The cat hated me because I vacuumed and made noise in the house, and the cat didn't like it, and so she would take every opportunity to rake me down. And it was quite painful, and my dad experienced the same thing, trying to pick her up sometimes. Anyway, after they died, I couldn't get the stories out of my head, and I thought, well, they'll make a nice bunch of comic stories. So I started thinking about doing 2-page, 3-page stories of some of these little incidents. But after I started writing down all the incidents, I had 100 of them, and I thought, well, at 2 pages each, that's a 200-page book. So if I want a new project, this is really worthwhile. Because in 1997 or so, when I started thinking about this, there weren't any books out there that I knew of. There probably were, but I just wasn't aware of them, about how people age and die and become completely anonymous and just nothing but patience and useless to the people who are taking care of them. They become faceless, they're no good, just hurry up and die so I don't have to keep taking care of you. And I loved my parents. My dad was not only had a great humor, but he was very adult.
Hey Ed, Mr. Wade.
Did you want something?
No, we're just looking for some equipment. That's okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, my dad had not only this great sense of humor, but he was a tremendously solid adult. He could see the whole situation. He guided me in both his care and my stepmother's care in a very kind way, and he showed me how to die. He showed me how he needed to die, and he showed me how it was inevitable and I shouldn't shirk from it. And I started thinking that he taught me his lesson, and it was going to end there unless I wrote about it. So that's another reason why I got involved in writing the book. He was teaching me how to proceed so that everybody handles the death in a reasonable way. And I think that's very unusual. There's so many of my friends' parents die, and they say, oh my God, I didn't know this and this, and what do I do with all of these, and da-da-da. And my dad said, my rock collection, you might call some college, they might like to have it. Bingo, South Coast, whatever it is, down by me, some college, some junior college. Stuff like this. I had books, same place. He showed me what to do so that I could manage. And I felt that this was such a valuable lesson, I just wanted to share it. And I thought, well, too bad for you, Dad, that you've had an artist for a child and one who does comics and one who can actually put together a story if she has to, because he would not have liked his privacy invaded, and I invaded it badly. So by doing all this privacy invasion, I felt it was important for me to at least do the book as well as I could, with the touching stories, the different things that happened. I wanted to honor them because I was really invading their space. But
Well, Joy, you're a big believer in editing too. And she had extensive people giving her extensive, ideas. Some of the people that helped you were Leonard Reifus.
yeah, Leonard was my art editor, telling me not which mistakes I had made and what to correct.
And Leonard is
Pencil stage.
and he's a comic scholar.
Teacher.
Teacher. He's you Google his name. He's all over the place. What was that comic he had?
All Atomic. No, I don't remember, but
I don't remember. But he's well known. as a
He's
comic
well
book.
known in comic. And Janet here, no, the artwork was done by somebody else. But he was my art editor, and then I asked my very close friend, who was an editor, to do the text. So I did have very strong editing at the pencil stage, so that because it's really hard to correct ink. And while I was working on the book, I developed wet macular degeneration. So at this point, when I work, I can't see too well out of my left eye for central vision. So at this point, I have to wear an eye patch when I work, and I have to work with a pen because I have to feel when the pen hits the page and the ink starts flowing. I can't tell with a brush anymore.
Now, what is that? Is that the dip pen?
The dip pen. I use a regular old dip pen, yeah. They're cheap.
Like the Hunt 102, like
Yeah,
the one
stuff
that
like
Crum
that.
uses?
Yeah, not quite that, but.
How do you keep that point from going through the paper?
Oh, well, you use,
It's like this,
you use high quality paper that you
I know,
can't hardly tear. No.
And I understand that I remember you telling me that you found your style changing as the book progressed, and you actually had to redraw 50 or 60 pages. Is
Well,
that true?
I drew the first 35 pages, and I was so unhappy with the artwork because it was too dense and too overworked that I threw out the first 35 pages and started over. And the first 35 pages looked an awful lot like the first, so I said, okay, I just kept going. But my style did change, and when I had sold the book in Xerox form, all completely inked, sold the book through an agent. I highly recommend agents. They save you a lot of trouble. They're worth it. It sold to Fantagraphics. Fantagraphics, wanted to edit it themselves, and there was nothing left to edit. I'm very happy to say. And they, when I sold it, I realized that the book was kind of inconsistent in the artwork. It's different at the front than it is at the back. I don't know if there's any artists in the room, but I drew, say, the first 35 pages, and then I drew page 75 to 125, and then I drew page 36 to 50, and moved around within the book, but it still showed the inconsistencies of being done over so many years. So I ended up spending 4 months after I sold the book to just simply make it consistent.
Now, why did you choose to, Laura, the character, which is you, now I'm assuming that Lars and his wife, the protagonist and his wife, what's her name?
Rachel in it.
Rachel, those are their names?
No,
Oh, they weren't, okay.
no, my dad's name is Roy.
Okay.
My name is Joyce, so there's an alliteration there, whatever it's called, and I took Lars and Laura for the same choice. I liked both of the names. Lars was a family name from our Danish background, and Esther's name, my stepmother was Esther, and I thought, well, Rachel is kind of an equivalent there also. Well, it's biblical, Old Testament. Rachel was definitely a modern, well, not modern, a turn of the last century Methodist. So, but she had a great deal of charm in her kind of slightly old-fashioned ways. And when I discovered that she was also pro-choice, I had to say my jaw dropped, because she had been such a born-again Christian and wanting me to be a born-again Christian for so long that I just made certain assumptions about her. And then at one point I discovered that she was pro-choice, and it just blew me away, and I never had the courage to ask her how she happened to become pro-choice.
Yeah, I have a mother-in-law like that, very religious, very straight, but she's adamant about that, which means in her past she had to make a very difficult decision. That's what I like about your characters. You're full of surprises. I particularly like the part where she's teaching you how to do a snap.
That's a true story,
You
too.
know, you guys know what snaps are, and
If there are any around.
and what did she say to you?
She says the way to remember how to sew on a snap is that the man goes on top.
There's a little old thing like this, and there's 5 little holes, and you got to sew.
Does anybody know what snaps are anymore?
Yeah.
Free Velcro.
Yeah. Yeah, Velcro's sort of the same thing, but no, I'm not sure which goes on top on Velcro.
You can swing both ways.
Well, it's like the stereo equipment. You have the male and female connectors for the stereo.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I understand part you went. Joyce likes to go to Greece every year, and you actually did draw part of this while you were on holiday in Greece, didn't you?
No, I wasn't any holiday. I was working in 100-degree heat sometimes with
Okay.
fans blowing on me, and then with ink coming off of a dip pen, you have to have
Oh, the humidity, yeah, talk about
the humidity over 40% or the ink dries up. And but I'd go to Greece. I'd try to work all year long at home, and the phone would ring, the husband would need dinner, da-da-da, all the usual stuff. He's pretty good. He's a great husband. But you're living in a family situation, and unless you're going to be really snotty to the person that you care for a great deal, you make amendments and make changes. So I long ago, he decided not to travel with me. He doesn't like to get on airplanes, and I like to go to Greece. So I started lengthening my trips to Greece from 5 or 6 weeks to 2 months and 3 months. And I would take as many pages as I could pack, usually 50, which is a quarter of the book, and I would do those pages in Greece just nonstop. I would eat, sleep, work on the book, and swim. That was it for months at a time. And I still, lately, the last couple of years, since I don't have to work on the book anymore, I go, but I'm sort of lonely for the book. I need to do a new project.
Alison Bechtel, same thing, when she's working on Fun Home. She arranged her life where she could get up in the morning, work all day, and do it at night without interruption. And I know what that's like. It's like dinner's ready, and you're going, one more panel. Crumb, when he did the Genesis book, Aileen rented him a little house somewhere up in the hills where nobody could find him. The amount of concentration it takes to do books like these is incredible. You have
Well,
no
yeah,
idea.
you have to think of everything that happened. I mean, it's like a person writing a regular prose book. You have to think of everything that happened and make no mistakes. And and finally, we found one at the very last minute, which was really kind of funny because it would have snuck through. But you have to keep all of this in mind, and it takes it takes a real concentration, and especially when 50 pages are at home, you travel with the Xerox copies of them. I've never been able to work with even the radio on. I have to have complete silence because I have to be thinking of every little thing I'm doing, and this cannot be distracted. And it makes me a bitch from hell, but that's the way it is while I'm working.
That's what my husband says too.
Well, mine doesn't say that. He's too nice. But he gets surprised for being nice.
To get the the cadence of the verbiage you have in the panels, do you read it out loud after you've printed it?
Actually, I don't think I do that, but I certainly go over it a lot in my mind, and of course I have an editor.
Yeah.
And so she will be just absolutely great at saying, well, you have to put this in, or you have to, and I say, no, I don't have to put that in. I have to leave some things unsolved. Like, I don't remember, you were mentioning something. So you have to leave questions in the reader's mind because it's really too much if you cross every T. It's not worth it.
Well, no, it's just, you have to have suspense and a little
You
bit
have
of
to
a
have a little
cliffhanger.
suspense, you have to have fun, you have to leave things here, and then you pick it up later, and the reader says, oh yeah, that's got to do with such and such. And yeah.
Now, who left in your family? You've got a son. I'm curious to know what he thought of the book, and if you have any siblings. Any feedback?
First of all, my husband hasn't read the book because
not yet.
my husband swears that he read the book while I was doing it because he would see. Well, I'm sorry, husband, but you didn't see all those 50 pages I do in Greece every year. So clearly you didn't read the book, and he has not read it yet. My son was given a copy of the book because he's in the book, and after several months, I said, what do you think of the book? And he said, I'm not done with it yet. It's still on the nightstand. And my cousin, who's not in the book, but who's very dear to me, saw the book in a Barnes & Noble and bought it and didn't make any particular comment except to tell me that she didn't remember some of the incidents, and she didn't remember our grandmother's house looking quite like that, like I put it in the book, which I took from a photograph. So I was lucky in that I had my dad's travel. I did backflashes in the book so that the characters would start becoming real, and so that these old fading characters, I wanted it clear to the reader that they had vibrant lives and they cared about their lives. And so I would do these backflashes, and I'm an only child, so I had inherited the entire house from my parents. And so all I had to do was go to my dad's photo albums and different things on his trip to Europe, and my stepmother's, whatever it was, I still had it as a rule. I don't have these things now, but I did have them for quite a while, and I had them when I was drawing the book. I'm trying to get rid of stuff. It's hard to fold an entire house loaded with stuff into one's own home.
Been there.
Yeah.
Was your father aware of Tits and Clips and Abortion Eve and the work you showed him?
If he was, no, I never showed them to
No.
him, and if he was aware, He never said a word. And this was prior to internet and Google and all that.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't, they just never asked. I think I've told them, I told them I was working in cartooning. They never wanted to see it. My grandmother, his mother, wanted to see, I think it was the original Tits and Clits one time. And she handed it back to me the next week and saying she didn't want to read it. So that was the end of that. I didn't push. I mean, they have their own lives.
Very southern way of dealing.
Well, it wasn't southern. She was practically born in California. But anyway, you know, people have Victorian way of thinking. Victorian would be more accurate.
So what's next?
Well, I have an idea, and I was telling our one of our visitors here today. I was telling her what my idea is. It's so big, it's almost hard for me to figure out how to start it.
Go to Greece.
Well, Greece is an easy problem compared to what I'm thinking of. We're all aware that in China, couples are limited to one child per couple in the cities. And there's a reason for this. China has too many people. And I'm realizing that the world has too many people. What are we going to do about it? It's semi-cruel to only allow a couple to have one child. It's also more than cruel to take away children and get rid of them so that we don't have such a large population. So how do we do this? We do it by educating women. As soon as a woman is educated, she starts earning her own money and she is not so dependent on other people for her livelihood, and therefore she might have get some ideas about learning about birth control. You have to get birth control available to women. You have to educate women. And my hope is to make every child that's born a wanted child. And if we actually are able to do this in the world, we will not have an overpopulation problem. And if some woman wants a dozen children, she can do this. And if another 12 women don't want children at all, this happens. A lot of women don't want to be burdened with children. It would work, but I don't know how to do it. And it's just that I know it needs to be done. And so I'm trying to figure out how to approach that.
Because another thing you did for a job was you were a bail bondsman.
Yes, I was.
Which I find a very
bail bondsman?
Have you ever thought about doing any stories from that?
First of all, there's a lot of funny stories, but they've been worked on. There's been people writing about bail bonds for a long time.
It's been
So
done.
I'm not that interested. I like to do something that hasn't been done and hasn't even really been thought of seriously. And there aren't too many subjects out there that are like that.
What time it is?
No, I don't. It's 4:45. We actually have, they give us a complete hour, so we have until 5.
Okay, we'll wait till
We can also take questions.
Well, yeah, maybe ask me
Unless,
questions.
are you done?
No, I'm sort of organic.
Well, Special Exits has been successful. It's going, and sometimes it's being used as an assigned book in nursing classes and
Great. That's terrific.
social, what do you call it?
Well, it's
Social
actually,
work.
my friend
Social work.
Rocco Versace that teaches at Palomar has a class called Comics as Literature, and this is going to be in the reading list next semester. They've been reading things like Optic Eye by Adrian Comedy and Funhouse by Alison Bechdel, of course. About 11 years ago, they were reading my book, Life of the Party, and then their finals, they have to draw their own autobiographical comic, and half the people do not draw.
Oh.
So I spoke there about 3 weeks ago and told them all the tricks and, you know, using silhouettes and close-ups of faces and things like that. And these classes are packed every semester. There's a great deal of interest in this book, you know.
This type of,
And it's neat, we have a library that has a section of comics now.
yeah, good.
That's great.
Well, I'm interested in medicine and comic. I mean, this book has got a purpose in the medical field or in the caregivers field. And there are people out there teaching caregiving, and I'm really thrilled to have it assigned as a textbook. I think this is terrific.
That's great.
There's a group called Comics and Medicine, which you can Google. I'm not going to bother to give you the thing, because if you just do comics and medicine, it will come up. They are combining it's a bunch of doctors and nurses who are using comics as a teaching tool. And I was invited to Toronto where they were having a convention or conference last few months ago. And I was just thrilled with things that they had to show. In fact, I don't remember. I brought a suitcase full of stuff, but I don't even remember what I packed in with hurry time to get here to the conference today, to get to the pen. Books on mom's cancer. A book on the best one lately, Mary, you haven't seen it and I brought it for you to see. This woman from this group, the Comics and Medicine, I don't know if she's a nurse, I don't know what her occupation is. It's very simply drawn, but she has drawn a small pamphlet kind of book on the human organ, women's orgasm. How it happens exactly physically and all this stuff, and it's illustrated, and she has illustrated it with a woman masturbating, and it is done so nicely that my jaw dropped. I was so happy. And she did another one called Cycling. This one is called Tip of the Iceberg. And the other one is called Cycling, and it's about the menstrual period and all the different things. And you know, we used to get these Kotex films, at least I did when I was a kid. They didn't teach you a whole lot, and this book, I'd love to see this everywhere. I took it to my doctor the other day, and he says, I want one for my library, I need this. And so that
Well,
Comics and Medicine are a great fit.
When we were young, it was like, don't put the thing next to it, right? And you know, film, there'd be a flower, and a girl would be running through the fields, and women grew up all differently, and that would be it. If they taught you anything, you might want to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, you can't help teaching them now because everybody knows everything, so we might as well teach them nicely.
But people, you know, people have always been, they ferret it out, you know.
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet. I mean,
Yeah, you do and you don't. Some people don't get it.
I was going to make a couple comments. My dad's a very devout Christian, and he's for a woman's right to choose.
Good for
He says,
him.
I have my beliefs, but he says, I have no right to force it.
Well, this is, as the old saying goes, very Christian of him. And I hate that phrase because I'm an atheist. And to say somebody is very Christian is implying they have a moral compass. And it implies that other people don't have a moral compass. So
Yeah.
I get very...
No, but
so
I
I'm
do
joking,
understand.
good
But
for
my
him.
wife went through endometriosis, and we had the group, and I was the only husband that was there. There was one gal, she had married a Middle Eastern man, and he wanted nothing to do with it.
Right, yeah. Well, they're taught to be fearful of women's menstrual periods. They're
Yeah,
taught to be fearful of
and
the
you
blood a
know,
lot of times.
it's a silent issue that a lot of women suffer with.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I think we did a good thing with Tits and Clits because we were one of the first to play with menstrual blood. But I think it was a really good thing to open up that subject to the world at large. I really am kind of proud of being a pioneer in menstrual blood.
and you know what? When you got the people upset, you were being noticed.
Well, yeah, but they were, getting them upset was making them think. I mean, they were reacting, so they were, yeah.
Yeah, but at least you had somehow, somebody had found you and somebody else.
No.
Maybe it wasn't in the most positive light, but like you said, they were discovering all this.
Well, we did a lot of bad artwork with 4 stories at first. It took me a long time to make a beginning, middle, and end to a story. But we'd say to be continued in the next issue. Of course, we'd never continue it because we didn't know how. But yeah, I don't know where we were. Next question. Yes.
I'm curious, in the history of comics with women, did you read like Wonder Woman? Did you see anything
Well,
in the super, like Lois
As a
Lane,
kid, I was aware of Wonder Woman, but you know, I really liked Captain Marvel.
Mary Marvel?
Not Mary Marvel.
You didn't care for
Captain-
Mary
No,
Marvel?
I don't know. I think Mary Marvel might have come along after I quit reading
About
kids'
40,
comics.
it came around 1945.
Oh, well, then I never particularly saw it. Maybe my dime didn't go that far back then. I don't know if I was telling this group, but I used to get $1 a week allowance after my mother died, and my dad was a very light guider. So I'd get 5 candy bars, dime each, and 5 comic books, dime each. Terrific.
Was that help you with comics?
Well, I think it
understand
helps to be
too?
a comic book reader
Mhm.
to be able to do comics. because I appreciated the artwork, I appreciated kind of what went into it. I tried to do comics when I was in grammar school, but it was before they had Xerox or anything, so you had to draw the same thing 4 or 5 times for your friends, and that was impossible. I think maybe one issue of that, long gone.
But I think where you're going with that is, women cartoonists have role models that are women in comic books,
Like
and not
art-
necessarily.